All right, we start where we left off last time. Okay, it also goes up and down. All right, so what we want to do now is to deal with multiple cubes. A simple way to deal with multiple cubes is to create multiple cubes. Um, you could, for example, think of start as create scene in our ogre code and have something that create cube entities as in our assignment 2, and that would create cubes. But we don't really know how to do this because we don't know how to create entities other than in the editor. So let's create duplicates of an already created entity in the editor. Then we will talk about the concept of prefabs, and then in a later tutorial we'll talk about the concept of creating entities from prefabs in code. So if you look at the possibilities, you can duplicate this, and we just duplicated the cube entity. It's called cube entity 1 because that's the automatic renumbering, renaming scheme when names clash for Unity. It's got everything that cube entity did have, and if you're surprised you couldn't see it, it's because it was made, duplicated, and put in exactly the same space. So they were together, one overlapping the other, and you could not see it. But this is easy. If you notice, they both have this script attached. There's just one piece of code, this code, and it's now running for both of them. It's like you've attached an aspect to every entity that you created. In this particular case, we used duplicate to create the other entity, and it duplicated everything, including the code. So that is true when I press play. Oh, well, what happened? Well, I had moved it in the editor in this area, but when it starts, uh, because the position vector is set to 0, and because in the code we say this, and velocity was 0, because the position was 0, it gets set to position 0, 0, 0. So it goes over there. So instead of doing that, let's say the initial position is 30, and we'll set it also to 30, so that those two things are well synchronized. And then we can see that the expected behavior, it shouldn't jump together, happens. So now if I press the up arrow, you'll notice both of them begin to move, right? Perfectly synchronously, because they're both looking at my, uh-oh, I lost them. They're both looking at input, and every time I input something, they're both responding to each of the arrow presses that I am doing. So that's not what we want. And when you have multiple entities, the right way to deal with it is you have the concept of a selected entity. So now you have to add selection. And we'll start as we did in that assignment with tab selection. To do that, let's add a public Boolean variable called isSelected, and we'll set it to false, and we'll only call process input if isSelected is true. Okay. So this means that if we go back to the editor, we should see is selected appear here. And if we say, and it's set to false, so it's not selected, this would mean it's set to true. So now for the second cube entity is selected as set to false, first cube entity is selected as set to true. That means if I play, only the selected entity should move. And in this case, not both, just the one selected entity. Okay? If I had unselected this and selected this, then when I hit play, only the other entity would move, right? Okay. So, so what I need to do is move the code that I had for input processing into kind of a main function. We used to put it in assignment 2.cpp, and then make the changes in velocity to the selected entity. So let's see how that looks like in two steps. First, we'll move the code over to something equivalent to main. And second, because there's no show bounding box in Unity, unlike Ogre, we have to come up with another way to indicate which entity is currently selected. And for that, we'll make a crude selection circle. That is, there'll be a circle or disk kind of surrounding under the selected entity. So let's start by doing the first part. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an empty game object, and I'm going to call it main. And main will be just an empty game object with a script that contains what? And we'll call this main.cpp, obviously. And all it does is it's got the code for processing input and a list of entities, the entities in our scene. Okay? So let's edit main, and there it is. And what we want to do is put everything from in here. I'll just put the whole thing in here. Put it in here, and I'll just call process input from here. Okay. I'll go back here. I am going to remove the stuff. I can just comment it out for now so you can see the effect. Okay, so now this will never get called, and there's two ways of doing comments in C# and C++. And I've commented that code out. So now my physics is not my physics and input, it's just physics, and all it does is recomputes position and sets the scene node's position. Right? Nothing else. It's getting much closer to our physics aspect that we've been doing in assignment 3. Here, the velocity stuff is having issues, mostly because there's no velocity variable declared here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare a place to hold a list of entities. In this case, I just want to hold either the entire game object which is this and everything inside it, including the mesh and the code. And I could say cube entities, right? Or I'm going to hold a list of these objects, which is after all a class, and I'm going to call it cube entity entities physics. Okay. And I'll tell you why these things are different. Let me save this. So in the first case, where I have a list of game object, each of these is a game object. Everything here is a game object because in Unity, everything inherits. Everything inside Unity that you use inside Unity inherits from game object. It's kind of a very generic thing. What I really want is to change stuff in here. I want to change is selected, so I can set which one is selected. So I actually want this class, objects of this class, which are attached to this game object. So for me, this is more important. So I'm going to not do that. I'm going to use this. And then how do I deal with this? All right. If you go to main, you will notice this is here. Nothing is happening because it's not getting recompiled because there are errors. So what I have to do is go back. I'm going to comment out this stuff temporarily. So this thing will compile because I want to look, it's compiling, all the errors are gone, and now I can see my list and delta velocity. All right, so you can see that this is the list that I declared. It's got 0 elements. I can edit this list inside the editor. This is very cool in Unity. And how do I put elements in this list? This is the other cool thing about Unity. I can drag stuff from here and put it there. And it puts the physics and input class of this game object in there because it knows about the types. Put it in here. And so my first member of this list, element 0 of this list, is cube entity. Second element of this list is cube entity parentheses 1. So first element of this list, you can see how it's highlighted. Click on this, second element of the list. First element of the list is this one. As you can see, second element of the list is this guy. The code controlling this. All right. So now I can go back to the code and now I can change this to say change the velocity of the selected entity. So I need to know, wait a second, I need to know some entity is selected. So I'm going to have to public some entity is selected. Right? And I'm going to say This is selected entity dot. Perfect. That's what I need. So if I do this for everything, okay. So now that's taken care of. But how do I know who's the selected entity? So what is this? Well, for now, let's just say that the selected entity is this cube, right? We're not handling tab selection yet. We're just checking that the small piece of code that I wrote, the things that I changed, kind of work. So if things work, then what am I going to do? Cube entity. If I look in cube entity, I'm going to say it's selected. That thing is selected. And since I am no longer doing this, if the selected entity's velocity gets changed, then one of those entities is going to move. In this particular case, the selected entity is this one, and that's the one that should move. Okay, so I move the code. I think this should work. Before I do anything else, I'm going to check things out here. I'm going to make it move slower. They've been moving really fast for me. For some reason, main, I just noticed, is at some weird location. It doesn't really matter because all it is a repository of code, main.cs, that I've been editing. But just to be shipshape, let's reset it so that it's at 0, 0, 0. There's no actual mesh associated with this, just this game, just this little piece of code, right? A list and a pointer to a selected entity and a variable called delta velocity, right? Okay, so does this code rearrangement work? If it works, then the selected entity, in this case this one, should move when I press the arrow keys, and it does, yes. So now my issue is going to be, all right, now I have to do tab selection. How do I do tab selection? Well, I have to handle tabs first. I'm going to say if input dot get key up, get key code dot tab. I'm going to call a function called select next entity. Okay. I haven't written it yet, but I will. Alright. Void select next entity. And what does it do? It sets this and sets the selected variable. So now, since we're doing some kind of round modular arithmetic, let's say we need an index. So I'm going to say int selected entity index. I'm just using long names because I can type fast and it's really disambiguating. That is, it's very clear what it is. I'm going to make it public because I want to see if I've got things right by being able to inspect it here. I didn't save the file, so let me go back, save this, and everything should be kosher when I go back. Compile, 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 done, okay. And if I look at main, I see that I have selected an index, it's set to 0, which is fine by me. And then I still have this list and the currently selected entity. So now what am I going to do? I'm going to say if, so I'm going to be called whenever tab is pressed. So I'm going to, basically what I want to do is to increase selected entity index until it reaches the number of things in the list. After that I go back to 0. So I'm going to say if, no, I'm going to say selected entity index equals, and I'm going to use this syntax from C++ that has been carried over, from C I think, and C++ that's been carried over into C#. That's very nice. It's basically an if statement within a single expression. It basically says if selected entity index greater than equal to, what's the name of the list? Cube entities physics dot count, basically tells you the number of elements. It's greater than that, then return 0. Actually -1, because if it's greater than that, that means it's over the end of the list. Otherwise, return selected entity index +1. So the value of this expression is basically if this part is true, then return this, and so 0 will be assigned to selected entity index. If this part is false, return this, so then selected entity index will be incremented. Okay? And then I need to do a few other things. I need to say, I have to basically unselect everybody else, right? In case, or unselect the currently selected entity, right? So I'm going to just do a blanket unselect all entities. So I'm going to say unselect all, and I'll write this little piece of code later. And what do I want to say? I want to say selected entity equals cube entity physics, the entity at this index. Okay. And then I want to say selected entity dot is selected equals true. This will basically set the entire list is selected to false. This will come in useful later when we deal with selecting multiple things. When we do box selection or group selection, and our list of selected entities is greater than 1. I'll say unselect all, and that basically says, and this also gives me the chance to tell you about different kinds of iterators in C#, which I also like a lot. So for each, it's really simple. What is the type of each of the things that I'm going through? Well, physics and input. And we'll call it physics. I'm not going to call it physics and input. So for each of these in cube entity physics, that's it. That's my iteration. And it goes through this list, and each time through the loop, this has the value of the next element in the list. So first element in the list, I'm going to say phx dot is selected equals false. And I'll go through the loop and set everything to false. If I was being a little tight, and neat. I don't even need the braces around both parts. Okay, so will this work for me? I'm not sure, but if works for me, whenever I press tab, I should see the difference between these two. And the only way I'm going to see it is if I press the arrow keys and the thing moves. These things would change and the arrow keys would move the currently selected entity. Right? I don't have any way to visually show which entity is selected for now. So let's work on the visual part a little bit later. For now, let's just see if this will work. Quick. Okay. So I haven't pressed tab, so nothing has been selected. Right now, this entity is selected, this guy is not selected. So if we look at main, this currently selected entity is 0, which is correct because currently 0, and that is this guy, and this guy is selected as set to true. So we've set things up correctly. That should move. Okay, it does move. So all right, stop. If I press the tab key and I look at what main is doing, I'm especially interested in seeing if this goes to 1 and if this changes to cube entity 1 physics and input, right? Nothing is happening. I'm pressing tab like crazy. Nothing is happening. Oh, because I wasn't clicking on this. Okay, it changed. Okay, I know what the problem is. I mean, it's changing and I should be able to move the other one, but it's taking several hits on this to have it change. So now I can make both move, right? And that is the problem with toggling, right? It's toggling so much between the two that it's running so many times that we're not sure what the resting state is. So instead of using get key, let's use get key up. So this will return true if or when the key that you've pressed you release. So it only returns true when you release the key. So if a key has been pressed and then released, it returns true when it's released. So that is a very much shorter thing. That should help us not go through this massive toggling issue that we looked at in Ogre. We handled it with a timer that would go off. So this one is selected, all right. And that worked, yeah. Just one click and it's working. I stop it, select the other one. Oh yeah. Okay, so now we need a way to add a selection circle. How do we do this? Well, let's see what we can do. Let's go to cube entity, and what we're going to do is say selection circle, health bars, and other things that might decorate an entity that we create in our game might all go under a hierarchical object that we will call decorations. Okay. All right, so in here we'll put a cylinder. There we go. It's in there, you can see it. And if you go inside this object, now you can actually see it, right? Because we're through the clipping planes. So, all right. So let's scale it in the X direction by 15. In the Y direction, we don't really want to scale it. And now you can see it on the outside, right? Okay. you notice that there's parts of the cube underneath the water. We haven't done anything about that, but let's leave it alone for now. All right, so the selection circle is on the water. It's about 1 unit thick. Cool, and it's perfect for that. The problem now is I have to do the same thing for the other guy. That makes it a little painful. What I'm going to do instead is I want to delete this guy, and that's going to have consequences for entries over here. I'm going to delete this guy, and I want to reduplicate this. Now that has decorations and cylinder and everything I need. Okay, and then I have to do the usual thing. I have to move it out of the way. I have to tell this guy that your starting position is going to be, let's say, 25. It was 30 last time, but let's make it 25 this time. So they get closer together. And everything should work. But now both of them are selected. Now I have to write code so that when something is selected, it makes this cylinder visible. And when it's not selected, it's not visible. It's actually easy to make a cylinder visible and invisible by turning it on and off, activating and deactivating it, right? So there's a way to access this activation inside code, and we'll show you how to do that. So essentially, whenever I'm selected, I'm going to be turned on. Otherwise, I'm going to be like this. All right? So this is great. Let's write the code for this. What do we need to do? Let's see. Well, first, how do I get hold of this cylinder to turn it on and off? Well, I have to, just like I have a variable called isSelected, I'm going to have a variable that holds this, a pointer to this cylinder. All right. So in physics and input, which is inside the entities that we're doing, I'm going to create a variable. I can put it anywhere. At this point, I'm going to get rid of this. It's just bothering me. And it's not needed anymore. Right, so see you later. We don't need this anymore. That's not what I meant to do. Right. And that's all we need. Now what I want to do is create a variable, and I'll put it over here because all my variables are up here. But I'll leave a blank because this is going to be a different variable. This time it's just a game object. And I'm going to call it selection circle. Because a flat cylinder looks like a circle. Because we are using lowercase for variables, which I did do over here. This is the only variable that's not lowercase in this one. So if I were to be consistent, refactor, rename, I want to call it cube. That's going to fix it everywhere, right? Okay. Then I'm going to call this selected entity. I'm going to refactor it by renaming it. And this does it much better than Eclipse return does that. So now you learn how to do refactoring or renaming things all at once. And I'll do it on all the files where it's referenced. And this is pretty good at it. So our convention is variables start with lowercase, function names start with uppercase. So, okay, selection circle, and what am I going to do here? I'm going to go back, wait for it to compile, go here, selection circle. I'm going to take the cylinder and let it have it. Okay. Same thing here, selection circle. Have it. Okay. All right. Some reason both were selected. Okay. All right. So now what I want to do is, if I am selected, okay, so I want to say, turn on the selection. Do I do it here? No. What I should say is, every update, every tick, if I am selected, selection circle dot set active true, else selection circle dot set active false. Actually, I could just say selection circle and say set it to is selected. If selected is true, it'll set it to true. If it's false, set it to false. I don't need this additional if statement and 4 lines of code. There we go. And we should be in good shape. All right, so now what happens if nothing is selected? No, we have to start with one entity, this one, selected. And we need to have somebody selected. So index 0, the entity at index 0 is selected. That's how we're starting. And this guy is not selected. Everything is cool. All right. Okay. So let's see if this will work. Okay, there's only one entity that's selected. If I press tab, uh-oh, something happened. Something was out of range. I don't know what happened. Let me see what's going on here. It's 0. Delta is 2. No, I don't see anything wrong here. Is selected. This is not being set as is selected. Something's off. What is off? I'm setting it to true or false depending on whether this is true or false. And I am setting this over here. I wonder what's going on. Main events. Oh, wait a sec. Oh. Because I removed one of the entities, this thing got redone, so I have to do this again. Alright, so cube entity here, cube entity 1 here, and everything should be fine. Save that. Alright, well, let's do this. Okay. Tab, so much better. Okay, it's going, come back, go back, go up, stop. All right, that is working. Now, if you want to be able to move the camera, as I've asked in the current assignment that's due, we would have to put probably attach a component over here that would then a script to the camera and then have it move around accordingly. It would it would respond to AWSDF and the other keys and move the camera so that we could follow these things around and do all the things we want to do. So 2 is easy. The one thing I don't really like about the cylinder is the fact that it's got this weird, first, it doesn't need a collider, and any kind of code that's running to check for collisions is just not needed at this point, so I'm going to get rid of that. I do need the mesh renderer, otherwise it won't show up. What I would like though is to change the color. There's kind of 2 problems. I don't want to keep changing the color of both of these. If I had 10 entities, I had to change the color of everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make one more change, and I'll show you what I mean after I change this thing's color. So instead of default material, I want to click on this little thing. It's going to give me a whole bunch of things that could make it. So here are the different things I could make it, right? Let's go with turquoise. Oh geez, I don't have really good taste. So maybe white was the best. This nice gray looks, okay, so I'm going to go with gray. Okay, so that's what I want. I don't want to change that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a new way of other than duplicates, of creating new entities. So I'm going to make a folder called prefabs inside 381, and that's where I'm going to put prefabricated components in. So if I take this and move it here, you'll notice that it goes there first, becomes a prefab asset, and the color here changes. Okay, so these 2 are now linked. If you remember, when we created water, we used a water prefab. Well, we're going to do the same thing. So now, if I take this and put it in here, I'm going to have 2 cube entities. Same kind of a deal. 20, and everything should work, right? The nice thing is, if I decide that this color isn't very nice and I would like a slightly different color, very noticeable, I can do that. Well, what I can do is I can actually go here, edit the prefab, instead of using ocean plane material, do this, and it happens to all instances of that prefabricated asset. Okay, I'll go back, everything is done, do this. So prefabs, and you can make a prefab out of anything. Just select it, move it into a folder called prefabs that you create anywhere in the hierarchy, and it becomes a prefab. This is really, really convenient, and Unity has done a good job in making this easy to do. So the problem was both were selected. So I have to set up things and make sure this is false and this is true. Okay. Now when I run it, everything should work. Right? Okay, so now, oh no, something else is wrong. Well, yes. If I go to main and I look at mine, well, I deleted the reference to what was the cube entity before I made it from the prefab. So now everything should be fine. no errors, and things move. Okay, that's the end of this tutorial. We'll go on to the next one shortly.